Hi, everyone. This is Tony Smith, Director of Sales Strategy Consulting here at the Brooks Group. I want to thank all of you for attending our webinar here today on the topic of how to optimize your trade show, collecting more than just bar tabs and business cards. With me today, I have Josh Winters, Director of Business Development here at the Brooks Group. Josh?
Hey, Tony, thanks for the intro. Obviously, one, thank you all for joining, but, the real purpose here today, kind of a funny title, collecting more than bar tabs and business cards, but we all know how much effort goes into setting up a trade show, and we want to make sure to help you maximize your trade show from an ROI perspective, to be doing the right things before, during, and after. So I'll maybe let Tony start driving here, but hope you enjoy.
Yeah, so if we think in terms of there's a lot of time, money, investment, expenditures into attending a trade show, from travel to booths to setup to everything that goes into a trade show, with the whole purpose being either helping existing prospects move along in the sales process so that they commit to buying, meeting new potential prospects, doing things with existing customers to show your appreciation. So all these things that go into a trade show, we want to make sure we're giving you some very specific tips and strategies that as a sales leader or manager, you can be aware of to make sure that your sales team is focused, they're intentional, and that they help you get the ROI you're looking for. So the first question is, why are we at the show? Well, obviously, there's a purpose around generating new leads, helping move existing prospects further along, networking with existing customers, checking out the competition and what they may be doing. Maybe the competitors coming out with a new product, some innovative launch, gauging your positioning. How well are you positioned inside your marketplace relative to your competitors? So there's a whole host of reasons why we go to a trade show, with the main purpose obviously being we want to show that not only do we exist as an organization, we have viable solutions for customers and prospects, and we want to generate potential revenue off of the trade show. So one of the things that we have to remember is when we're at a trade show, we're not really there to sell a particular product. We're there to potentially qualify future opportunities, to prioritize where we spend our time. Maybe we've got specific people that we're inviting to our booth, and we want them to take a look at what we have in our booth and have some conversations. Maybe there's been some initial conversations, and this is a chance to show off who we are and continue to establish that credibility that we're a viable solution. Making sure that we're leaving with viable next steps. So all those contacts that we meet, all the people that we have conversations with, if there's potential qualified opportunities, that we don't just leave them hanging in the air, that we've set some guaranteed follow-up and next steps that's going to happen after the trade show. One of the things that will help your salespeople be more focused and more intentional is to understand that there is a process for working a trade show. And when working with organizations, we teach them what we call the impact sales process. Now, while that's an overall sales process, the same process holds true at the trade show. And it starts with the first step of the investigate step. That's making sure we've done our homework prior to showing up at the show, that we're prepared, that maybe we've invited certain people that's going to meet with us. We've set some preset meetings, that we've talked to existing customers, whatever it is that we need to do to make sure that we've done our homework so that we can have a successful show. Number two is meeting the people at the show. Having a quick moment to build some trust and rapport, to create an engaging conversation. So it's not about just showing product, it's about setting the stage so that we can do some probing to determine, is somebody qualified? We've all been there where somebody may take 30 to 40 minutes of your time and they're just kicking tires. They don't have any intention of doing business. They're just potentially wasting your seller's time. We want to make sure that we're quickly qualifying opportunities or potential prospects and leads, that we're setting appropriate follow-up next steps, that we're applying a potential recommendation, right? So based on our conversation, that we may have some potential recommendations or solutions for them, that we're helping to confirm in their mind that we're a viable solution, and that ultimately we're tying up and getting a commitment to next steps, a next meeting after the trade show. There are 3 rules of impacts. One, we shouldn't skip steps. So we need to be fully prepared before we show. We need to make sure that we're asking those questions that we need to ask as we're having conversations, that we don't leave the steps till we've completed it, and that we understand exactly that where our customer or prospect is, that we're in the same step at the same time. There may be some who've already done a lot of their homework in today's marketplace, and they've already got an idea that what you have is a viable solution. So they may be further along in the buying process than we realize. It is up to your sellers to quickly understand where they're at and what needs to happen next. To resist the urge to talk about price if they're not a sole buyer, if they're not bought into your products and services as a solution, any price you give them is going to be too high because there's no connection to value. If we confuse them, they're going to buy nothing. So we sometimes have to take a moment to understand where they're at. Have they looked at information? Have they confused themselves? And ultimately, if we don't establish trust, we can't sell value. And without trust, the only thing we're left to sell on is price. Josh?
So Tony, one of the things that I hear some things that we should absolutely be doing there. I hear a couple things that we shouldn't be doing, but are there any additional mistakes that we should really try and avoid other than, trying to quote price to an unsold buyer? And, obviously we don't want to confuse them, but do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, we want to avoid coming across that we're here to just grab you, right? Pounce on you. And some sellers do this, pounce on you and then try to sell you something right here. This is not the time to sell them something. This is time we're initiating contact. We're engaging in conversation. And what we really want to do is set the stage for a meeting that's going to be very focused on their objectives, their issues, et cetera, after the trade show.
Got it.
All right. One of the things that will help sellers identify quickly whether or not somebody's qualified or not is to have metrics that they use that they're looking for in the conversation. So if we think in terms of a qualified opportunity, there's 5 metrics we are looking at. Number 1, they have to have a need and be aware of the need. So if they don't have a need or they're not aware of it, then they're simply not qualified. Now, sometimes the role of a professional seller is to raise the awareness of the need by the conversations they have. Number 2, they have to understand that overall decision-making process. There are going to be some people that come to your booth or speak with you. Maybe they're not in any position because they decision-making authority because they don't have the authority or the ability to buy or commit. Number 3, they've got to have a sense of urgency about the decision. So is there a definite time frame? So for example, if somebody's looking at a piece of equipment or they're considering a piece of equipment, is that something that they're just considering right now and they're not going to have any urgency for a year? Or is there some pressing need that they've got to do something in the next month or 2? Number 4 is they've got to trust you and your organization. And number 5, they got to be willing to listen to your ideas and have open conversations. When they have all 5 of these, they're pretty much qualified and they're ready to buy. It's simply a matter of who they're going to buy from. But what our job is to understand how many of these do they have. If they have 2 or 3, that means we've got to have a structured process for how we follow up on them because they're moving through that buyer's journey. And at some point they are going to make the decision.
So Tony, is there a sweet spot or a number, so if let's say they have 3, we might do one thing, but what if there's only 1 or 2 of those things that are actually that remain true after you kind of have an initial conversation?
Well, for example, let's say they do have a definite need and they're aware of it. And let's say they're willing to listen to you, but right now there's no sense of urgency, or maybe they're not the decision maker. How can I turn that person into an advocate by asking them about what's the internal process that your organization goes through to make these type of decisions so that they become my advocate and can help me navigate that process? And maybe it's going to be a follow-up meeting with my advocate that I've created here at the trade show that's going to help me navigate through the channels of how the decision is going to be made.
That makes sense.
So one of the things here is that they're going to directly determine their perception of you and your organization based on how your sellers are coming across. We want to differentiate ourselves versus everybody else that may be at the trade show, because you're going to have competitors there, that we are going to be a strategic resource. So how your sellers position themselves by being very knowledgeable of the different offerings that you have and how they help customers and how they are solutions for them and the return on investment that customers get from your offerings, truly understanding your company, your power messaging, why you're different, how you do things differently than maybe the competition, which means you got to have an understanding of your competitors. But one of the keys here is knowing what's happening in the industry. What are the trends currently happening in the industry? Those are great areas to have conversations with potential prospects or customers because it shows that you're knowledgeable about them, their industry, their business. And one of the things that will really differentiate your sellers from maybe the competitors who are also at the trade show is their ability to prepare on the front end to understand these potential customers' businesses some of their challenges and issues, and being able to speak with a business acumen that says, I'm not just another seller with a product, I'm somebody who could be a potential resource for you. When we think in terms of who we're meeting, being able to identify what role they have in the organization so that we can tailor our conversation accordingly to why they make buying decisions. So there's really 3 levels of an organization when we think in terms of how organizations make decisions. At the lowest level, these would be level 3. And these are going to be people who may be at the trade show. These could be lead technicians, they could be operators, they could be service managers, people in that role, maybe a parts manager, somebody of that nature. But if you think about it, they're not at the higher levels of the organization. Their role is to make things work on a daily basis. So the reason they support or don't support is, are you going to help make their life easier? They don't like a lot of change. They'll quickly say no to something if they believe it's going to create more work for them. So we got to have a conversation around how what we have to offer is going to make their life easier, and it's not going to disrupt what they're already doing. At level 2, this is going to be where you have people who are being charged in their organization to deliver results. And that's why they make buying decisions. When you can connect your solution to actual results that they're looking to achieve or things they're trying to implement, they're going to be supportive. This is going to be your VP of operations, people like a fleet manager, a general manager. Sometimes with the fact that purchasing departments are becoming more sophisticated, a lot of times higher level purchasing people are going to fall on this level as well. And at the very top are going to be obviously your owners, the CEOs, people at the top level of leadership in an organization. And they make decisions based on not the product itself, but how things fit into the strategy of where their business is going, where they want to be 2 to 3 years from now, what their current state is, what issues may be holding them back from achieving where they want to be in the future. So these are going to be various levels that we may interact with at a trade show. We need to be able to quickly realize as sellers what level they are at and make sure our conversations are tailored appropriately to their level. Investigate. Let's talk about some of the things we need to do prior to the show. Josh, one of the things that I have seen too many times over the years at trade shows is there's no investigative work. People didn't send out press releases or mailings to potential customers prior to the show. They didn't look at the attendance list to see what organizations are going to be there. Maybe there was a top customer that they would love to acquire, and they're going to be at the trade show, and maybe a seller's been trying to get in front of that potential prospect or customer, and they've not been able to get meetings. Here's a great opportunity to walk up to them, identify who they are, and maybe start a conversation that you wouldn't get outside of the trade show. So being able to set preset appointments, but more importantly, having objectives to what you want to achieve at the show. Leaders and managers should have objectives for the show, but so should the sellers. Because if we have objectives that we want to achieve, we're more likely to achieve them. Josh, would you like to add anything there?
No, I think that, obviously with the amount of technology that's out there, I feel like these lists are, they're easy to get the list, but how do you, I guess in my mind, how do you go about delegating to your team kind of their responsibilities and hold them accountable?
Yeah, and so I think that's where you've got to clearly define the expectations and what you're expecting of them to, what you really expect them to do prior to the show, and measuring that. Because if you don't measure it, it may not happen.
Got it.
All right. So when we talk about your list, obviously there's 3 groups that you can segment your list into. One is potential leads. These are people that you're not currently doing business with, or maybe you did business with them in the past, but it's been quite some time since you've done business with them. So these are potential leads we want to target, and we're going to see if we can qualify if there is an opportunity with these leads. The second is active prospects. These are people that you're currently working on, and you're using the trade show to advance them through the sale. So maybe it's building credibility and confirming in their mind that, hey, you're a viable solution, because they can see you at the show. They can see your products and solutions. They can see your booth, the impression that you make. You're just using the show to advance them through the process. And then obviously there's existing customers, people that you're going to continue to network with, continue to enhance that relationship. And by the way, sometimes existing customers can be great advocates for you with active prospects or potential leads, because they're already doing business with you. Or maybe there's contacts that they have that's going to be at the trade show, and they can make referrals and introduce you to other people. Identifying your top targets. After reviewing your list, Ultimately, you should identify who are the top targets in each category that we absolutely want to make sure we touch at the show, that we connect with, that we let them know that we're wanting to have a conversation with them, that we're having those conversations. So we should definitely be making sure that we know exactly who our top targets are. Personal objectives. I talked about having an overall objective for the trade show, but sellers should have personal objectives and ultimately, for example, generate 3 new qualified leads from people that we're not currently doing business with. Meet with the VP of a particular company to introduce a new solution. I can't tell them exactly what those objectives are. They have to define it for themselves, and they should have some very specific objectives that are measurable, that after the show they can determine, did we meet our objectives? They're more likely to meet them if they know what they are going into the show. The meet step. Anytime we're engaging with folks, we need to have a direct value statement, especially for new leads, that directly, quickly, and concisely communicates the potential value that we bring to customers based on our solutions and services. That we're open to being receptive to various prospects. Because one of the challenges, and it's a big mistake I see in a lot of booths, you see a lot of sellers, Josh, standing around in packs, chit-chatting, and not actively pursuing people who are walking into the booth. They wait for people to come up to them. Let's talk about that for a moment. Josh, what have you seen when you've been out at trade shows?
So I feel like sometimes let's say I'm a customer and I'm going around and I'm looking at stuff. If somebody approaches me, I'm much more likely to engage. If I have to go and seek out information and try to interrupt their conversation, I'm going to maybe grab your pamphlet or whatever you have and I'm going to move on. So I feel like I'm probably doing myself a disservice by not being able to really ask, my whatever service I'm looking at, able to ask the questions that are important to me. So I can easily just move on. There's thousands of vendors there. Somebody else might do what you do, just in my mind. So I'm missing out on a key opportunity if I were not to engage that particular person coming into my booth.
Good. And another thing is have a statement of intention, right? Have something that quickly allows you to concisely convey your message so that they want to engage with you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I would think that there's sometimes that, you come in, and I think we're all guilty of it at some point, when you ask hey, how are you? When ultimately it's, what are you here for? And that's okay to almost be that direct, just to kind of get to that information. We're all trying to get to a ton of different people. We're all in a hurry. So sometimes I think some folks can be maybe overly relational and more conversational.
Yeah. So one of the things that we teach sellers at trade shows is approach people in neutral. Don't be too high energy. Don't be too low energy. Be professional. See if you can recognize their personality. If they're more of an outgoing talker, hey, adapt to that. But if they're very reserved, analytical, tone it down, because you got to take the time to let them start feeling comfortable that you're a person that they're willing to interact and engage with. And one of the things that will really help is to make sure you've got a compelling message that gives them a reason to want to have that conversation. And it's always good to end that message with a question. So we're going to talk about some power questions and making sure that we are giving people a reason to have a conversation. And that is thinking through how we really help customers. What are the real benefits? Is it profitability? Do we save them money? Is it cost savings? Is it they become more efficient with our solutions? Do we create time savings? There's all these different things that your products and services do for customers. But if you can't connect it to something that's really important to them, or you can't convey that message in a way that they can really understand and it's not articulated clearly, then to them, it's just another product. And there's plenty of products out there. So the probe or the conversation becomes very critical because you're using questions to open up that conversation. And one of the things is when you hear something really important to somebody, take a moment to dig deeper. Find out why that's important to them. Tell me more about that, for example. That allows you to quickly prioritize, is this a qualified prospect, or is this just somebody stopping through and they're really not a true prospect for us? I wanted to give our listeners here some sample questions for new leads, specifically those prospects that may be stopping by the booth. A great question to ask is, well, help me understand, Josh, what prompted you to stop by our booth today? I love that question because now they're going to tell you. And it may be, look, I've got a new project that's about to hit. I'm going to need 3 pieces of equipment to make that project successful. That's a pretty viable, qualified prospect if you hear that information. So, finding out how familiar they are with you. How do they make decisions in their organization? Questions that I can ask that engages them to tell me more information, so I'm listening, so I can make the appropriate recommendations around next steps. Josh, anything you'd like to share there?
No, I just think, and as I look through just this list of questions that you've kind of provided, it seems like the intent is just to try to figure out if they're a qualified buyer and if it's worth, if it's worth the time to spend, or if they are simply just kicking tires, which is part of going to trade shows. You're going to have to talk to folks that, simply aren't ready to buy, willing to buy, or able to buy. But no, I think these are good initial questions where you can also maybe even go a little bit deeper and start building that relationship and be that strategic advisor.
Well, and when you think about trade shows, there's the booth, but then there's breakout events that people go to. There's drinks at the bar in the evening time, et cetera. All of these are great places that if we've got some pre-prepared questions that we can ask, it's more than just that chit chat. We're actually showing that, hey, we're concerned about you, and we're identifying, hey, is this somebody that potentially could be a person that we could provide a solution to? If you've got existing prospects that maybe you're advancing through the sales process, and maybe it's been a month or two since you've last had a conversation with them, there's some great questions. Hey, has anything changed since our last conversation? I'm seeing you at the trade show. Maybe something's changed. What are they trying to achieve at this event? So you've already got some sort of initial relationship with them. Why did they come to the trade show? What are they trying to achieve? What are their objectives? And obviously, it's always great to ask them, what do you want the next steps to be, especially if you're already in the process of taking them through the sales process. In the apply step, we really want to understand, based on our conversation, because a lot of these conversations are going to be no more than 10 or 15 minutes, what is the correct depth of where they're at relative to those 5 metrics I showed earlier? And what is their interest for us to follow up with them? Can we go ahead and get a meeting on their calendar? How do they want to be followed up? Would they rather us communicate with them by text? Is it email? We've got to really determine what the next steps are and what they want the next steps to be, and go ahead and start getting their commitment. Because if we don't get their commitment to a next step, they're going to walk away. They get home 3 days later, they forget any conversation they had with you. In the convince step, obviously we want to establish our credibility for the next meeting. So here's, based on our conversation, I recommend we set up a next meeting for these reasons. Josh, what do you think? That's a great way to establish our credibility, because I've listened to them. I've tied that to, it's going to be a value for us to have another meeting. And then I'm allowing them to confirm in their mind that, hey, I should go ahead and set a meeting with you. All right. And I can use obviously products and demos for current prospects, because we've got all our equipment and products and stuff at the booth. I can use demos there to convince current prospects that this is the right solution for them. Josh, as we think about this, because we know that sales leaders and managers put a lot of money into trade shows, getting their people there, hotel rooms, cost of travel, everything that goes into it. What's some questions they should be thinking about?
From a leadership perspective, in my mind, I get a little bit of heartburn. You spend all of that money, your $50,000, your $100,000 deep into this, without some sort of goal or projection there of what I expect out of my team. I might as well just probably throw that down the drain if I'm not holding them accountable. So the questions that I start thinking are, it's, one, who's really holding the torch and making sure that we're holding our team accountable to these results. As an owner or a president, that's probably not your job. There's probably somebody who can do that for you. As a sales leader, sales manager, I feel like that's probably our responsibility in that regard, just to make sure to set a clear expectation. But it's obviously for this particular show or whatever show you're going to, it's a significant potential revenue source. So making sure that you're optimizing that. So as far as specific questions, it's more about, I think, having the right plan in place. And those are probably the questions that I would ask myself.
Well, and I think you got to, as leaders or managers, be talking to your sellers throughout the show. Who have you met with? What have those conversations been about? Have you set next steps? Is there a date for a follow-up call or meeting? So you're not only establishing that you've got expectations throughout the show, because people lose focus, but also being there to motivate them, being there to encourage them, really helping them drive that the reason we're here is not just to have fun. We're here to conduct business. We're here to generate potential prospects and leads for our organization. So one of the things that I highly recommend is pay attention to what your sellers are doing there. And if you see some people engaging in things that you know is not in the best interest or positions your company in the best light, stop it. Walk over and have a conversation with those sellers. Be encouraging. Be there in the booth with them, right? The more you're actively visible, the more likely they're going to be focused on the task at hand, which is introduce yourself, greet people, have conversations, potentially qualify opportunities, allow people to experience the solutions and the power of what you have to offer, why you're different than the competition, and ultimately to set next steps with either potential prospects, existing customers, or people that are already looking at your solutions and they came to the trade show to be convinced it's the right solution. Josh, as we wrap up here today, any other thoughts or comments?
No, I think it's, covered a lot. In my mind, I think it really does go back to how do you collect more than just a lot of expense reports, and how do you really come back with with actionable plans and actionable next steps. So happy hunting, everybody.
Yeah, and if you think about that, people are going to get leads. There's got to be a clear follow-up plan and process in place. And as leaders and managers, that you're checking in to make sure that that follow-up is happening. Otherwise, 3 weeks go by and that lead got wasted. So thank all of you for listening today. Hope your next trade show is very successful. And we wish you all the best in business. Thank you.